Hi, welcome back to part 2. This is Annie Musgrove and this is my botanical drawing lesson at home. I decided I'd have a bit of fun filming it to see if I could share it with you. I'm going to do part 2 now, which is shading in the hard parts, the stems and the buds, and then we'll do part 3, looking at the leaves later on, so a bit at a time really. So my battery doesn't run out. I've never done this before, so I have absolutely no idea what it sounds like. So just to recap, the last time I just showed you the equipment I'm going to use and how to set up, trying to get a light source in one direction and putting your chosen twigs, whatever you're going to draw, onto a piece of white paper to help you see what's going on. And I've just done the layout in the last session so that I've got the basic drawing, the outline of the drawing, really faintly on my page. While you were busy getting on with that part 1, I just did a little tidy up in the meantime, just rubbing off any extra lines that I didn't want. So in this section we're going to have a look at shading, and because I've got the light coming in one direction, I'm able to see that the top of the twig here is much lighter than the underside of the twig, and that difference is going to help me when I shade to get a three-dimensional image or some solidity into the twig. Now bits of this twig are quite smooth, like this piece of twig and this piece of twig, but when we get down to where they've joined down here, it's much sort of more textured and knobbly. So I'm going to deal with just making it, I'm going to put it all on smooth, and then I'm going to put the texture on top to show the difference in this older bit of the twig and the new bits of the new growth up here that are much smoother. And hopefully in this session I'm going to deal with showing you how to shade the buds to give them some solidity as well. So as I said, try and keep your head in one position so that you don't keep changing your viewpoint. So the pencil I'm going to use is going to be a B, or a slightly softer pencil than you did for the layout, and make sure it's really super sharp. That's always a bit of a help. Oh dear, mine just broke off. There we go. And I'm going to start not pressing really hard, just shading really gently, and I'm going to start from the darkest point first. So every time you put your pencil on, generally find that, because you're finding where the paper is, that tends to be a darker mark than when you're lifting your pencil off the page. So I'm going to start doing the shading from the underside of the twig down here and build it up gradually. There's no rush. We've got all day to do this. There's absolutely no rush. If you go wrong, you can always, take some of it off with a rubber. It's not a big problem. So at the moment, I'm just building up the bottom of the twig. Not worrying too much about any texture. I'm going to just leave the top of the twig completely unshaded and white just for the time being, and I'll come to that in a minute. So you can see, hopefully you can see a bit more definition now as I do the underside of the twig. So I'm going to work my whole way up here, having a good look at what I'm doing. I can adjust the shape if I haven't got that quite right, and make sure that I'm staying in the lines I've created and leaving the little buds out. Now there are various places where I can see there's very little light because the twig is sort of shading itself, so I can colour all of that in a bit darker so it's not all exactly the same. And you can use a very sharp point to outline the very bottom of the twig where it's really dark. Okay, so I've just basically done that quite quickly, just on the whole of that twig for you. And then what I'm going to do is use my sharpened matchstick, and I'm going to kind of pretend my matchstick is my finger for smudging in, and I'm going to smudge it across as much as I need to the top of the twig to join up with my outline so that it's smooth and there's a difference between the top of the twig and the bottom. So it's kind of really faint grey where I've smudged it in. So you could use your finger, but it's really messy when you use your finger, unless you've got a really tiny little finger. So I'm doing this quite quickly, just so you can get started. we go. You get the idea that I've smudged it all in now up to my outline, and where I've gone a little bit over the outline, I can use my rubber and just clean up the edge very carefully with the rubber. So it's a nice sharp edge. And if I've overdone it and lost a bit of the definition that I want, I can just use the point of my B pencil to put that in on the bottom. I hope you can see this, what I'm doing here. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to do that for the whole of the twig, and then I'm going to put on some extra texture. So here, where this little twig joins the main twig, I'm going to use, might use, if I've got one, a 2B or a 3B, and make sure it's really sharp. Get a really nice sharp black line. And I'm just going to trace the shape with my sharp pencil up where it joins and put on a little bit of extra texture. A few extra marks to show that where it's joining the other one. And then I'm going to put on some little knobbly buds that are underneath using that sharp pencil. So now we've got it's starting to build up the shape and the texture of the plant on top of those smooth marks that you put. Now I've got some little buds here. Mine are really tiny, so it's really hard to see. So I'm going to use that dark pencil to do the underside where the bud is joining the stem. And I'm going to go back to my lighter pencil, might go back to my HB or my F pencil to do the bud itself. So my bud's got a little outline around it, fortunately, on the stem that I can see, otherwise I'll lose it. And on the end of the bud, it's actually really light because that's where the light's catching it. So I'm going to just leave that white for now. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment and let you catch up.